Alright guys, hello and welcome back to some more Raging Loop. We're still lore diving. Last time, we learned a bit about the formation of the village and the formation of the religion. We're putting some historical pieces together. With Nosato, of course. But yeah, let's just continue on. Before moving on to the next chapter, we put together the region of names of Fushioshi, which the great-grandfather rediscovered from the archives. According to him, Fushioshi had several districts, each one under the jurisdiction of the village heads. The Migaruma had Fushiki, where the Shinai shrine was built. The Higuchi had Hoshizuki, where people gathered. The Nosato had Tomeguchi, the medical plant field right beside Kagegawa. And last, the Umetsu were given the Hacho, the lodging area. According to Kyonosuke, these regions remain in Kami Fujiyoshi to this day. In fact, the names of these regions had existed from the era when the name Fujiyoshi began to spread to the outside, as was the designation Kami Fujiyoshi. On the other hand, places aside from Kami Fujiyoshi had already been clearly identified and named, such as Yasumizu.
Yasumizu でなく、Yasumizu.
Rest and lowered.
なるほど。ここへ来て、先々先代も我々と同じ結論に至ったのだな。不識は、櫛。つまり、髪の毛を。星月は、肝。肝臓か。
All these word
影側の
tricks.
抽表記。影。骨。留め口は、わかりやすいな。足。そして八丁は、爪。上藤吉の地名は、すべて人間の身体に基づいた分割をされている。
そして、休みずは、人、木、主に分割して組み合わせれば、
人柱。
Okay. His great-grandfathers seem to have no clue about the purpose of the names. However, he did guess that the oldest one was either Fujiyoshi or Yasumizu, while the other names were new. He concluded that link between those names and words werewolf and human sacrifice was related. There's another thing here. He guessed that Kami Fujiyoshi was named after body parts to represent a single human as a way of responding to or opposing Yasumizu. Another guess was that by burying the sentiment in the name instead of burying the people in the ground, they'd avoid killing their own. Honestly, it seemed to me like we didn't have enough to understand the true intention behind this. Though, the fact that they hid the words human sacrifice in Yasumizu was pretty shady, I would say. You can assume that it was named that because it was a human sacrifice meant to help the area, including Kami Fujiyoshi, prosper. Or perhaps it was related to the human sacrifice from the origin of the village. Regardless, there was definitely ulterior motives behind the names. As who knew Yasumizu's future, I was certain of that. Fujiyoshi and Yasumizu had become Fujiyoshi and, yes, kanji stuff during the Meiji period, and became a part of a single area. The great-grandfather concluded that the naming was based on local conventions and it was meant to hide the village's past. He had nowhere to continue from here, and his writing in the diary ended. The next section was started out by Kyonosuke's great-grandfather, but after his writing grew worse and worse and finally stopped, his son took over. Family tradition. According to Kyonosuke, his great-grandfather had gotten a mental illness and began acting eccentric. He'd seen it with his own eyes. Damn, he was alive to see his great-grandfather? I technically was too, but I was a kid, so I barely remember him. The final reasonable bits of writing left behind by him cursed his deteriorating mind and hoped that his descendants would take over his research. His wish was fulfilled when Kionosuke grandfather found this room and took over. This section was primarily made to give detailed descriptions to the outdated rites and customs of Fujiyoshi. Naturally, the lack of historical accounts was a hindrance. However, the documents owned by the Nosato family and the knowledge he gained as the head made it possible to do it. He was also married to someone with ties to the Migaruma, so he also gained access to some Migaruma records. Having gathered info from various sources, he reached some reliable conclusions, though his efforts to gather information had made him the target of the other head families. His mind also seemed to deteriorate during his twilight years. The final bits of his writing in the diary seemed to scream his fear of death. He died on May 1st, 15 years ago. The text here made it evident that he died in the Feast of the Yomi Purge. As the hand of the supernatural looms over us and takes over our lives, I realize that I am losing control of my mind. Now that I have seen the might of the god I was to venerate, what duty do I have to continue the previous head's research into our homeland of Fujiyoshi? I will probably be hanged tomorrow, and in all honesty, it seems like a favorable outcome at this point. What if the irresistible urge to sleep faded and I opened my eyes to see the wolf-faced god? I would be unable to bear the fear. The wolf's bane I shall use to end my life lies in my hand. And that was that. That was it. Kionosuke's voice was shaking. From what he said, his grandfather was an intelligent gentleman that he knew personally and respected immensely. Anyway, the text here could be summed up as thus. Fujiyoshi had several strange rites and customs. When combined with the ones unique to specific head families, the number grew exponentially. It revealed all the details about these things and even had info we really didn't care about right now. The content about the umetsu was particularly harsh, even though it was noted that not everything was here. Info about the Migaruma, however, was extremely limited. However, it was said that horrible screams could be heard from their storehouse.
あの日、私はいたずら心で三の蔵の地下の扉を開けた。決して入っちゃいけないと言われ
The
た。
gods.
このお印が刻まれた鉄の扉。そして。
It was a morbidly interesting read, but there was only one thing that mattered to us. It was the custom of lynching in Yasumizu. It was basically describing the Feast of the Yomi Purge. The Ukami-sama would return from Yomi to get revenge for being killed. The story was the same. There were two notable points here. One was that it had apparently begun 500 years ago after the village closed itself off from the world. And the other was that Kami Fujiyoshi was mostly unevolved in the feasts of that era. But it changed? Kionosuke's grandfather examined the feast's origin from various angles. He investigated the stones in the Hanging Pines graveyard, looked at the records of Kami Fujiyoshi's mason, and concluded that Kami Fujiyoshi were making the graves. And according to the mason records, the Okiba were placed in Yasumizu at this time too. 500 years of history was enough to make it a historic landmark, but they had no megaliths from millennia BCE. They were simply put to help turn the village into a great Lord Shinai worshipping holy ground. The words left behind by the elders of Kami Fujiyoshi and Yasumizu gave us even more info. There was the legend that, in a time where samurai still existed, Yomibito poured out of Yasumizu and attacked Kami Fujiyoshi. That coincided with the rebellion Kionosuke had mentioned, the reason why the head families oppressed Yasumizu. Looking at both the documents and the word of mouth, the rebellion had happened 5 centuries ago, shortly before the village became isolated. In Yasumizu, Yomibito were said to be scary creatures completely covered in blood water. You could find the word blood water by playing with the kanji in the name Saranaga. Bloodwater Rapids. The stream was considered corrupted even half a millennium ago. Anyway, though the legend was warped by superstition, there is no denying that Kami Fujiyoshi was attacked by people covered in Saranada mud. The grandfather concluded without a doubt that this incident was what made Kami Fujiyoshi people so afraid of Yasumizu. This rebellion was the very cause of the decades of isolation, the creation of the Shinai faith, and the start of the Feast of the Yomi Purge. As for what that meant, it was all planned for the purpose of holding the already discriminated Yasumizu down and preventing further rebellion. Yeah, we could have guessed that. The grandfather thought that Yasumizu was purposely created to be discriminated against. It was a bad, dangerous place to live in, and that's why they send all the outcasts there. The reason why it wasn't abandoned wasn't mentioned here, but anyway, people continued calling it home. In governing, intentionally creating a lower class and treating them poorly satisfied the upper class, and thus made their governance easier. You see that in a lot of stories, and not just in like real life. It was something you saw all over the world, yeah. Even in Japan, there was complicated historical demonstration that left its mark even on the current era. Thus, the presence of a settlement meant to be looked down upon was good for the leaders of that era. However, they didn't want any more rebellions. So, how could they stop it? One way was to make them fight amongst themselves, the feast. Another was to make them so superstitious that they wouldn't even think of rebelling, also the feast. 2-in-1 deal. Basically, they had to make them believe the lie that there were wolves among them who were killing people, causing them to kill each other. By doing that, they would sap any strength Yasumizu needed to rebel. They also prepared a background story to make them believe that the anomaly was actually real. But again, there is actual supernatural stuff happening, so that's still a question we need to answer. But I think we got the gist of this even from last episode. The grandfather guessed this was the true purpose of the 5-century-old religion. His sources for that were the documents gathered by his predecessor, which claimed that people from the local temples and shrines were called into the village. He assumed that the incomplete or intentionally destroyed records were those regarding the scholars they summoned to help create their religion. That seemed absurd at first, but after thinking about it, it was entirely reasonable. I mean, it is kind of crazy. They created a religion just to keep people down, keep order. I mean, you can technically say that about most religions, but just creating a new one is kind of crazy, at least from that time period. The settlement they looked down upon had bared their fangs at them, so what did they do? Call the smart people for help. That was natural. And so those scholars teamed up, created a new religion, and made the settlement fight itself. And if they'd given the head families roles in their legends to ensure proper control... Man, it sounded messed up, but it didn't seem impossible. Sounds crazy, but obviously it's real.
あれは上藤吉の者が読み人かもしれない安水の者と目を合わさずに済ませるためにつけさせたものだ。
They wanted to avoid eye contact not only because they thought they were corrupted, but also because they were afraid. Kami Fujiyoshi was afraid of Yasumizu. It was a possibility I wouldn't have considered before, but it also seemed likely. It'd be pretty scary if the people they looked down upon finally let their grudge take over and become fearful marauders ready to enact their revenge. And because they were aware of how badly they treated the settlement, the guild grew even larger, and they started controlling and discriminating against them even further. When you looked at it that way, they made a whole religion just to protect themselves. And boy, was that insane, that's what I'm saying. But I guess that asks the questions of like how gods exist. Like, did they actually like exist, or like did a god spawn from them creating this religion? I don't know. We don't know the technicalities of that. Now with the feast's origin revealed, what was that about the head families not being involved in it so much? Apparently the first feasts were a lot simpler than the current one. There was the purification, sheltering, dreaming, and the limit of 1 per day, but there's no actual punishment for breaking these laws. They'd probably set it up to prevent indiscriminate massacres. Also, there's no wolf selection, and there are no guardians. So they just winged it. They're like, okay, just keep lynching wolves until you feel like there's no wolves left. But to be fair, I feel like it's really hard to set up. First of all, it's a logic game, so all those rules and stuff probably weren't thought about too much, but still, it would be hard to enforce them if you're just going by human stuff. Like, how are they gonna sneak in and give them roles and stuff like that and enforce it? The heads, or Fujiyoshi's leader of that time, only circulated the Yasumizu legend that the wolves came back. By spreading the local legend along with a lie, they motivated the people to kill each other whenever the mists appeared. It was successful, and the people started killing suspected wolves every time the mist showed up. In response to that, those who spread the suspicions were brutalized at night. This weakened Yasumizu, left the place a breeding ground for future problems, and too weak to rebel.
待て、そんなバカな。おかしいだろう。そんなことで殺し合いが起きるは
Religious
ずがない。
superstition. It's a bit thin in the past, no, Sato? Probably would have known that.
実際の脅威がないのに殺し合いが起きるというのか。
昔は今とは違います。迷信が殺し合いに発展してもおかしくない。
Exactly. Lots of historical accounts. Remember the Salem witch trials? That shit wasn't even that far back, I think. I guess relative to what they're talking about now. Though this shit's happening in real day, but again, it's different from the original feast they set up.
おそらく読み耳の宴は安水の住人たちにとって役立つものだったんです。
どういうことだ。
I'm also interested in what he means.
先に進みましょう。
Maybe we'll find out. Sure enough, the grandfather seemed to believe that, to the people of Yasumizu, the feast made the killings into a just cause. According to this, the feast wasn't concerned, or wasn't considered a paranormal event, not even by the Yasumizu people themselves. It was just a justification for lynching. Purge Day. The hand of law didn't reach this backwards village, and Yasumizu was even more isolated, a settlement for the ostracized. Of course, there had to be conflicts and wrongdoings, and the social system to solve them was limited. Thus, there was demand for solutions beyond the law. The feast fit the bill perfectly, so some people took living in Yasumizu took advantage of the feast to kill, some unruly citizens, maybe some criminals that they couldn't normally punish. When the mist came, they could easily get rid of people they didn't like, or just people they didn't like. However, that came with the risk of being targeted by their friends and family. This continuous cycle of lynchings and revenge eventually destroys the minority and leaves the majority wounded. The feast ends and law returns to Yasumizu. It seemed like the ostracism they'd done in ancient Greece. Anyone who was against the law of the village had their names written on a pottery and voted to be exiled. Never heard of that. A backwards but effective way to keep order. Can you really call it backwards? Back all the way in ancient Greece? It's more civilized than just killing them if they didn't, instead of exiling them at least. Though while the punishment there was exile, the feast came with a death penalty. It was clearly unjust, but they found it better than nothing. By having these occasional unlawful disputes, they actually prevented the settlement as a whole from crumbling. Those who participated in the lynchings had their guilt lessened by considering the legends and myths. Superstition had real-world effects by telling people they'd be hanged if they were bad. The renegades among them would be silenced. So yeah, the Feast of the Yomi Purge had its perks for both Kami Fujiyoshi and Yasumizu. Also, apparently it was a long-running tradition for Kami Fujiyoshi to do certain things immediately before the mists came. They summoned the children of Yasumizu to Kami Fujiyoshi and told the women to help them with food. There was no end to these records. It was much like the mountain festival, the carrot for the stick they constantly provided the settlement. But it was also a form of population control. They didn't want Yasumizu to be completely depopulated, so they protected the children. Law against no lynching children, or no wolves can be children. That's nice. Wish we had that still. If you consider the high school students' children. At least Meiko, dude. Have a protection for Meiko. Though to be fair, she's survived literally every time. Or at least until the end of the feast. Who knows what happened after we got crushed by a million sheep. Meiko was 1v1ing the giant monster. This tradition was alive to this day, even 8 years ago. Tai-san, Kaori-san, and the children have been saved from the feast when they were called. Also, I just thought of this. Another reason for Rikako's suspension, like, we know that she helped Shiemi a lot, and she protected Meiko a lot, and she was introduced in Haraki a lot. If she was the dreamer, maybe she was, like, trying to keep the anomalies alive so they can change the dream, like, as much as possible. So that might be why she's so friendly towards everyone, including Meiko. Just hands up. Just throwing that out there. This tradition was alive to this day, even 8 years ago. Tai-san, Kari-san, and the children had been saved from the feast when they were called. So, while it had its roots in superstition, the Feast of the Yomi Purge became a kind of a social tool. So I'm guessing maybe I was a little, like I said, like supernatural stuff started happening, but maybe it's literally just for this feast, and they have been controlling the feast since the last one 8 years ago. If we believe that, that's why they took out Tai and stuff. And obviously, like, since this one is clearly supernatural, maybe they had no say in this one, because they didn't take care of Tai and some of the important figures. Because if you were the village heads and stuff, you would keep Tai around as a leader figure, since she's so loyal to the heads and like super religious. So she's like a good like person to keep alive, I guess. So while it had its roots in superstition, the Feast of the Yomi Purge became a kind of a social tool.
なるほど。統制されたリンチ。いいな。これはもう合議による死刑制度と言っていいだろう。
Basically the same thing. Well, I guess it's the popular vote part.
我々、上藤吉の人間に都合のいい形で、安水の中で完結する。
Oh no. Wano Sato still feeling that head pride. Seems like pretty shitty people. I mean, it's not his fault. He was born into it, of course.
これでは室たちが言うように、完全に長者は悪
There we
者で
go.
はないか。
I'm glad. No Sato character growth. You love to see it. He's so cool, man.
どうでしょう。当時の統治者たちは、当時なりの良識感覚で、良い統治を目指しただけかもしれない。
Even if they meant it as, even if they thought it was a kindness, it doesn't justify it at all. I don't even think they meant it to be a kindness. Because again, it was literally made to keep people down, right? It had its benefits for both parties, but still.
問題は、現代に至るまでその統治が続いてしまっていることですが。
そうだ。今の安水なら、
True, but I'm barely certain this feast isn't orchestrated by the heads, at least.
そう書いてありますか？
戦中戦後に宴は3度あったとされているな。
You probably just don't know how to stop it. You know, when you create a religion, you can't just take it away. Well, you can. Obviously, there's like pagan ones that got destroyed completely. But if you still want to like run a village and you just keep going along, it's not like they can stop it, right? I mean, they could, but it's like it'd destroy the whole culture around the area. Even in just Kami Fujiyoshi, like as we saw, like how they act, like how they can't cook in their own homes and they all have to eat at the watering hole. Like it's just too ingrained in the culture of the region to really just be able to say, okay guys, maybe we should stop doing the feast, right? The feast meant to manage society had ended with the one that began at the start of World War II. When Kionosuke's grandfather wrote this, he called it the previous feast. The ones who survived it said that an actual wolf had appeared. Also, rules like sheltering, which had been ignored until then, now came with a supernatural punishment. Okay, so this, I was wrong. This isn't the start of, this isn't the first one with supernatural stuff. Maybe, here's another option. Maybe, like, the heads don't even fully recognize that what the original purpose of the feast were. Maybe they're just, it's so ingrained that maybe they even believe it themselves a bit. Though that seems a little naive, but just throwing that out there if supernatural stuff has been happening for a while. And I guess I should have guessed that if Kionosuke's grandfather is talking about like visions of a wolf god or whatever. The legend had gone from mere story to reality. And this is kind of supports the idea that maybe like a god was created because they were doing this religion. Kind of like spawned something in. The grandfather himself had witnessed some paranormal things too. There was a pile of dog corpses that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Hey, we saw that too during the werewolf thing. Maybe that's one of the things that need to happen to spawn the monster. Because that happened because no one died from corruption the first night. Or maybe that's just, again, that always happens if no one dies from corruption. Just like to make sure the villagers know that this is serious. Though thorough, violent deaths given to the rule breakers. The wolves who would come in through locked doors and brutalize the ones inside. That's also different than locking of doors. And finally, the unity between the wolves, hell-bent on killing the humans even if it meant their own death. That was the feast I knew. The next text was written by the previous head, Kionosuke's father, and he observed the third feast of the recent times. Alright, we're going down the family tree. Daddy no Sato. It was the one that happened 8 years ago, and its survivors mentioned impossible paranormal events that actually happened. It was the same, the exact same. The feast had been supernatural 3 times in a row. And this was the 4th one. Okay, we know the exact time frame at least. 3 times. So was it? Okay, I didn't really pick up that the great grandfather's feast was paranormal, but I guess it was. Or there was a feast that like in between the great grandfather and, or the, yeah, between the great grandfather and the grandfather. That meant that something had drastically changed with the feast that happened during the war. The reasons for that wasn't given here.
大丈夫ですか？ショックだとは思います。少し休みますか？
Need a coffee or something?
いや、いい。一気に読んでしまおう。次は。
Must be hard though for Nosato, who is kind of proud about his family, or at least acts proud, and obviously is getting closer and closer to be like connected to him. Like obviously he knows and probably cares about his father more than the grandfather, and then the same for the grandfather and the great grandfather. Like Kionosuke said, the final section of the diary was written by the previous head of the Nosato family. He inherited the will of his predecessors and tried solving this mystery. Though unlike them, he seemed to prioritize documents that had been released to the public. For one, there was cutouts of articles. He had taken various clippings from newspapers and magazines to create an extremely large scrapbook. There were bits from local newspapers, national ones, and both general and specialized magazines of varied renown. Basically, he gathered all the info regarding Fujiyoshi, no matter how minor. Of course, we didn't have the time to look through all of them, so we relied on the index in the diary. We found out that this small village had a number of unexpected major events happen in it. They were so big that they actually made it into national newspapers. It's probably bad for business. Well, depending on it. Some of it's depending on the content. Some of the oldest and more notable ones were articles about the serial murders that happened here over 60 years ago. There were a number of articles with titles like 20 deadly break-ins in Fujiyoshi and murders in 20 houses in Mountain Village, and I found that number to be significant. Though the number of places that had been attacked was 20, the number of casualties was 17, 8 more were injured. Regardless, it was definitely big enough to make a mark on Japanese history. Yeah, I mean, that's wild. That would definitely make headlines, like 20 break-ins, including 17 deaths in Sudbury or something. The Sudbury's a little bigger. Oh, if it's in Kami Fujiyoshi, then I'd say Sudbury's still a little bigger, but around there. Maybe something like, I don't know my northern geography as I used to. Northern is basically like the more rural area of Ontario. And I used to go up there a lot, so my grandfather was from Sudbury, mining village back in the day. This event was well covered for something that happened on the eve of World War II, and it ended with the culprit being sent to Tokyo and quickly executed. The incident was reported for 2 years, from when it came to light right up to the capital punishment. It could be summed up like this. On December 27th, 1940, in Fujiyoshi Village, Kami Fujiyoshi, Hochizuki, a man covered in mud, invaded a private dwelling. Oh, really living up to the past. Wonder if he was from Yasumizu. He quickly used the kitchen knife. He had to attack 2 of the people inside, destroy the property, then escape. One of the victims went on to die. The culprit went on to continue invaded houses in Hochizuki. Murder... Wait, I thought his name was Hochizuki. I misread that. Oh yeah, okay, that's just a village in Kami Fujiyoshi. Thought he was Hochizuki. Murder and destroy property. After 30 minutes of this, he escaped Fujimura by foot. The crime was so sudden that the inhabitants and the local police couldn't do anything about it before it was over. In 30 minutes, he went to 20 houses? Now that's some good pace, man. It's really good pace. That's like in a house less than 2 minutes, and he managed to destroy a bunch of shit and kill or injure people. The incident came to light when the local police reported it to the Metropolitan Police. Since cars weren't widespread in the area yet, the doctors from the surrounding villages hurried over with their horse-drawn carriages. That was how much of a big deal it was. The police had gathered a number of officers and established a perimeter to surround the culprit, but in the end they failed to arrest him. The witnesses, bloodstains, and the lost items made them conclude that the culprit had changed his clothes somewhere up the mountain, then escaped by going down the river. They followed after him, but since it was the end of the year and it was hard to get around, it took them time to find proper footprints. On January 3rd of the following year, the prefecture police noted that the perimeter was broken, but this wasn't reported. The investigations that followed bore no fruit, and the newspapers and magazines wrote about the escaped or hidden murderer. But then, at one afternoon at the end of January, a man showed up in the police station in Mangetsubashi, Tokyo, and said that he was the murderer who escaped Fujiyoshi. Okay, so he might not even be the real one. Maybe Kami Fujiyoshi just set up a fall guy to keep this story from continuing, because it is a bad look on the whole region with the villagers. There had been much speculation about where the culprit was from, but it turned out he was actually a local, which raised a few questions. Or it could be real. But it could just be fake too. One of them was, why couldn't the locals figure out who it was? This question was left unanswered, and the man who turned himself in, Kihei Tochitani, 30 years old, became a subject of significant controversy. From this point on, the major newspapers simply reported how the trial was going, while the magazines had a ton of opinion pieces. Kyonosei's father commented that the Migaruma were actively keeping journalists from entering Yasumizu. At the same time, they didn't resist the police and in fact were highly cooperative. But in the end, Yasumizu wasn't really mentioned in the trial reports. It could have been the weak legislative system of the time or the result of the Migaruma's efforts. Under such circumstances, they had held Kihei Toshitani's trial. He insisted on several things. That he was too drunk to remember the details. It seems fake, man. However, he was certain that he was the murderer. He lived in that area and was on bad terms with his neighbors to the point of holding a serious grudge. When he sobered up, he became scared and ran away, and since he knew he couldn't keep running forever, he just turned himself in. He was too afraid to return to Fujiyoshi. Some had found a statement that he'd attacked 20 households in 30 minutes questionable, but it was a trial under significant public scrutiny. I mean, yeah, it actually seems impossible. So that's why it seems fake. Like, again, it's under 2 minutes in each house with 2 people in. Like, how much can you really do? And I think, like, all the noise that would make, like, you'd figure out, like, I don't know. It just seems a little too much. Especially just for one person. And since Kihei Toshitani admitted to the crime, he was executed based solely on that. It happened 2 years after his arrest. The capital punishment was carried out, and he departed this world without further comment of note. The news agencies were now all covering World War II, so these serial murders ended up being forgotten. Also, Kyonosei's father noted something about him. 3 years before the incident, Kihei Toshitani had been sent to Yasumizu because of the trouble with his neighbors.
気になりますね。
そうだな。おそらくこれは、栃谷喜兵衛が読み人伝説を模
I wonder if Haruaki thinks he's just a fall guy like me. There is a possibility it's real though, especially since he was living in Yasumizu, but also the head families can just pick out a guy from Yasumizu and easily pin it on him.
安水での暮らしがそう長いわけでもないのに、そんな事件を。
富士吉村民に共通の読み人を恐れる気持ちが裏返しとなり、恐ろしき読み人と同一化を試みたのかもしれんな。あるいは、長者が地質する大昔の反乱のことをどこかで聞いていたか。
そして僕が気にしているのは、
Yeah,
この時期のことです。
kinda convenient.
この事件が起きてからおよそ2年後に、例の
To your own.
本物の宴が発生している。
That's interesting. That might add credibility to this being real, actually.
まるで同じではないか。
そうです。500年前、反乱を起こした連中を抑え込むために、信内侵攻なんてものをでっち上げた。
A mock rebellion to restart the feast. Okay, kind of convincing me a little. Of course, there are no mentions of the feast in the articles. The next notable thing was the time when the war ended and the soldiers returned to Fujiyoshi. These news articles were accompanied by village PR notices and photos. One of the men in the photos had the name Shosaburo Matsushima. That face and expression, I had no doubt that he was related to Kanzo Matsushima. Many from Fujiyoshi had departed for the war, and actually some of them were from Yasumizu. Also, according to the reports, they had a notably good survival rate. They'd also achieved a lot on the front lines, and the PR said it was the blessing of the Ukami-sama. In a different document, it was said that they had charms that resembled the Ukami symbols used in the mountain festival. Like Chiemi? Oh no, that's a little different. There was a photo that showed one of these crests wrinkled from wear. The shape was new to me. Yeah, we've never seen that. However, the 3 diamond-like symbols made me think that it was related to the one I was familiar with. Yeah, they used to make the eyes, the wolf eye things, which was actually pictured here. The text next to that said, some chose to wear ominous symbols instead. Whoa, the real wolf's blessing. For reference, there was a divine crest of Great Lord Shinai. It was actually my first time seeing it, and apparently they couldn't use it as a good luck charm because it was just too important. Well then, if it was that sacred, it made sense that I hadn't seen it in Yasumizu. It was a bad place after all. Next, we skipped the unimportant bits such as the election results and major staff changes. We went ahead a few decades and arrived at an article from the 80s. This was pretty bad. Cholera outbreak in Mountain Village, 4 dead. That's a little unlucky. It was the pretty simple incident. Apparently someone who'd gone on a trip overseas had infected the village. The name of patient 0 was hidden, but it had to be one of the village heads. They were the only ones here who could travel to other countries. It was damn awful to read about, but apparently the disease spread through water contaminated by the first victim's vomit and excreta. I know excrete is poop, but I never heard of excreta. I guess it's just the same thing. And there were victims in both Fujiyoshi as well as Yasumizu. Also, it was only reported after the disease had subsided, which was probably caused by the Migaruma's intelligence network.
これ、時期的には野里さんもご存知のはずの事件ですよね。中学生かそこらですか？
Who was patient 0? Who spread the cholera?
もちろん知
What?
っているとも。何しろ私
At
は
least he
かかってい
survived.
て
That's all that matters.
え、コレラにですか？
ああ、そうだ。というか、あれには相当の人数がやられたからな。
Only 4 dead is pretty good then, if so many people got infected. But I guess when they noticed it, they probably had the doctors do something. I don't actually know much about cholera, besides the name.
なんですって？今
Isn't that a poop disease? Yeah, it is, right? I was kind of thinking of gonorrhea, but it's different.
確か、そうだな。牧島
Muro.
山脇さんやら。あとはそうだ。室もかかっていたはずだぞ。
Oops. First time in the episode, though. Good rate this time. Accidentally charting.
その通りだ。後で知ったところによれば、野
The
里は
doctor
早々にこれ
family
らだということを看破していたのに。
and the religious ones didn't let them act on it. Classic.
一体何が？
I'm guessing.
これらにこそ神内様の過去が効くとか言ってわけのわからん祈祷を行って野里の措置を妨害したのだよ。おかげで状況は悪化し遅れて発症した私は身内が後回しだと言ってかなり捨て置かれたのだ。
Man, we haven't really learned about the Migaruma too much besides like the recent loopings we've did in the last couple episodes, but they they don't seem like good people.
医者の鏡みたいな家ですね。野里家は。
Let the doctors at least cure themselves if you're not gonna let them help the others,
鏡なもの
which they should.
単に身車が示す順に治療していただけだ。
But they are the top dog, sadly.
もちろん安水は長く捨て置かれ結果的に住人2名と看病に当たった植松の者2名
Two Matsus died.
なんですって？
It's
上松が
unlucky.
2名。
あの頃植松にはまだ数人が残っていたがそのほとんどが民間療法を行って逆に病気に感染してしまっていた。それが露見した時はすでに手の施しようがないほど悪化した2名がそのまま亡くなったのだよ。あれが植松の没落を決定づけたと言っても過言ではなかろう。身車が適切いや違うな。野里がクス氏の家が
The culture was too strong.
正しく動いていればよかったのだ。
ちなみに植松里香子さんは病気にはかからなかったんですか？
彼女は当時9歳だぞ。その家業に加わるにはまだ若い。
ああ、な
Yeah.
るほど。
The prostitution, or whatever it was. Prostitution light. I knew what he meant. But something didn't feel right. His eyes betrayed a sense of confusion and his tone lacked confidence. Was Rotako not there because she's the dreamer? And she popped out later?
何か隠されていますか？
何 鍵もない。いや、なんでもない。
I mean, we're already starting to answer Tato, but it would be interesting if she wasn't here at the beginning. That's what my intuition's saying from his responses. That his memories are like filling in the blanks.
そうですね。
But then why does he love? Dude, I would love to know why he loves Rikato though. I wouldn't push any further this time. I guess maybe some sympathy that the Umetsu died because the Nosato couldn't act might play into it a bit. Another major article was one about a corpse that had washed up in the local part of Saranada, officially known as Saranagawa, apparently. It was a woman from Chiba and she had a search party out for her. It said that she simply committed suicide.
これは読み意味の宴と関係あります？
いや、これまでの宴とは日付が合わない。おそらく関係のない自殺者だろう。
Yeah, I remember that. We're just dying in here.
長に死体が流れることも珍しくねえ。渓流釣りだかなんだか知らねえが、上流は危ねえっつうのよ。
首都圏からの遠征自殺者ですか？
まあ、うがってみるなら、長者の誰かが関わって殺したのかもしれんが、その場合は皿長には流さんだろうよ。
では、これはいいとして、この8年前の大雨災害がどうのっていうのは、藤吉とは関係
Well, 8
ないように見え
years
ます
ago is when the last feast was.
逆に、藤吉が乗っていないことが重要なのだろう。各地の土砂崩れは報道されているのに、藤吉のはないと。
ああ。
I see, so even the ones who supposedly died in the landslide were hidden from the public.
あとは、めぼしいものはないか。
これは港区連続火災放火の疑い。なんでこんな事件が？
手記に説明があるぞ。報道にはないが、放火された7件の
The
建物
same
は
person.
同じ持ち主のものだと。
というと
Somebody's balling.
身車家だよ。連中は中だけではなく、外にも不動産を持っているのだ。
なるほど。そういった資産から収入を得てるのか。しかし一体どうしてそんな。
宗教は儲かるということなんじゃないのかね。500年もの歴史があれば、もう新興宗教とは言え
And
ん。
that's not new anymore, but relatively new to a lot of religions.
おそらくは我々のような骨の髄まで
Really?
神明神にやられている連
I
中
mean, that
でない
made sense, I guess. So it's more far spread than I thought.
多数いるのだよ。中には何代も前から玉串料とか言って金銭を払っている者もいるのではないかね。
もしかして身車は宗教法人格を持ってますか？
さあ、そこまでは知らんね。しかしそういうのは国からいろいろ口出しをされるのではないのかね。
どうだろう。
I don't know how like a religion becomes a real religion. If there's actual like official recognition, because that kind of made sense. Because I don't know about a lot of countries, but I do know there are some like religious exemptions for taxes and stuff. So there must be some process to make it official.
さて、このくらいでおしまいのようだが。
Yep, we'd read the entire diary. Good quality bonding time. A whole 3 hours had passed since we started. Kinda close. It's around like 2 hours for this. In real time. The mist would come soon. I'd learned a lot from this. But if you ask me, all I got in here were maybes. Nothing was certain yet. Well, the certains were like the formations and stuff, but at least we have like a time frame and we can try to find out like what happened to make this supernatural. Even so, I thought it was more than enough for this loop. Good talk, buddy. See you in the next loop.
我が父も結局何かしらの真実にたどり着くことはできぬまま
You know, I mean, it's not gonna happen, but I feel like it would be cool if he stepped in this loop and like stayed with Nosato and started investigating what was happening, but it's obviously not gonna happen.
私が君の言う通り、これから宴に巻き込まれて死ぬとすれば、我が兄がいずれこの後を継ぐのだろうかね。いや、君が死んでしまえば全てなかったことになるんだったか。
Leave it to me. We will fix this and save Japan. Surely. His ride rin pained my heart a bit. I had to say it.
申し訳ありません。野里清之助さん。
Finally warming up to my boy.
君が謝ることではなかろう。
Glad we got a lot of bad story on him. I kind of just liked him for like other reasons, but now that he's a sympathetic character more and stuff, maybe he's more likable to general audiences. Because I kind of felt alone. Well, I don't know, but I felt alone in kind of liking him. But this helps. Nosato starts on the rise, baby.
しかし結局、ここまで皆が狂気にとらわれる答えは何なのだ。迷信を信じる心と反乱を恐れる心。
Not anymore. But if it's happened the last couple of feasts, then you'd have to think that maybe the heads know something. Or at least Migaruma. I don't know about the other heads.
いいえ、違います。神様のせいです。
はあ、なんだ、君も結局は神仏に責任
We've
を
seen
転
it,
嫁する
bro.
のかね。
And we're looping.
かつての
Isn't that enough?
先達のように。
Isn't that enough proof?
そうだ。君はそもそも君が体験してきた数々の怪奇現象に対して科学的に説明がつくと言っていただろうに。
すみません。神様の件についても、おおむね科学的な、というか、理屈をつけることはできると思います。
何？
ただ、これについては、まだ僕の中で完全にはまとまってい
Well,
ない。
I wanna hear it.
その代わり、他のものについては、ええ、説明はつきますね。
I missed my chance to properly apologize. How much time did we have, I wondered. Would they wait for long?
では、読み意味の宴の不可思議を
I'm all ears
全て紐
too.
解いてみたまえよ。必ず与えられるという汚れは一体どう説明するつもりなんだね。隠そうがどうしようが見つかり、断罪されるその理不尽さは。
監視カメラと盗聴器です。
What? He stared blankly for a moment, then laughed. I mean, are we really gonna say this is scientific? It kind of made sense if the Migaruma controls the dots and they can send the dots to people outside, but so that made sense. I'm interested in the giant werewolf thing that kills you no matter what. And how do they unlock? I guess, okay, so if they have cameras and maybe microphones, they can pre-unlock the door. Because the wolves usually discuss who they want to kill. And then they listen, like, if the doctor... So I'm guessing also, like, to force people asleep, they probably put, like, some drugs in the food. Maybe without Kyrie knowing. Maybe she has just some sort of seasoning or something that automatically makes that happen. So that puts people to sleep unless they're the wolves. But how would they do that? But I can see most of the things happening being scientific if you do the cameras and stuff. The big question really is, like, the big wolves for me and the dreams. Specifically the wolf dream. Everything else made sense if they drugged the people, go in their houses at night, clean shit up, unlock the doors while listening through mics, and view people outside with cameras so they can coordinate the dogs. But the big werewolf's obviously a big thing. And the whole god thing, and the giant monster, and the looping. But the looping and giant monster are clearly supernatural.
戦時中にあったとは言いませんよ。というか、8年前にあったかどうかもわからないです。
Oh.
ただ、低レベルなものはあったかもしれない。ぶっちゃけどこかに糸電話でも吊るしてあったのかもしれません。
It's a little harder without cameras though to see if anyone's out at night, but I guess they would know who's drugged
あるいは
or
シンプル
whatever.
にスパイを休みずに置いておく
There are scientific answers. And I'm more willing to believe it now that we know the Migaruma has dogs in the basement.
物騒だな。
言いたいのは休みず集落は隅々にわたり監視されているということです。
バカな。少女はそんなに暇ではない。
でも一方で神内様の信仰を盤石にするために信じられないほどの労力を費やしてきたのも長者でしょう。わかりますよ、あなたの気持ちは。僕もそのバカなと疑う気持ちがトリックを隠蔽する最大の仕掛けです。マジシャンが芸を披露するとき、その種は往々にしてそんなバカな手に引っかかるはずないというようなものか、あるいはそんな大仕掛けをまさか用意しているわけがないという真理の穴に隠されているものですよ。観客全部が桜だとかね。ちなみに僕はこれも最初は疑いましたよ。休みず全員が決死のドッキリ要員だとか。
待ちたまえ。それでは不可解に傷つけ
I
られ
mean,
た死体については
humans can do that.
死体を運搬して重機か何かで破壊すれば
Mm,
実現はできますよね。
I don't know. It seems a little
おかしいだろ
far-fetched.
う。霧の休みずからは出られないと君が言ったことだ。
地下の抜け穴でもあるんじゃないですか。
This seems like reaching.
待て待て待て。じゃあ本気で犬をけしかけて殺
Mainly
した
just
死体を
the...
わざわざ抜け穴を通って上藤吉まで持ち帰って。
I'm with them on most things, but I don't know about moving corpses, destroying them with machinery and moving them back. Don't you feel like we would have seen them? Well, no one really died from corruption when we were the werewolves.
それを手間暇かけて損壊して休みずまで持ち帰っていると、そんな馬鹿げたことを。
馬鹿げているからみんな信じる。
じゃあ狼が触れる
I mean, that's
家の
easy.
鍵が勝手に開いたという
That's the
の
one
は
I explained. They just listen in on the wolves when they're in their meeting spot and pre-unlock the doors before they get there.
遠隔
Or
操
keep
作
them
の
locked.
電子錠でしょうね。
No, Ada, okay, to me that's more far-fetched than what I said, because they live in really rural houses, right? Like Hashimoto stays in a shed, or we stay in a shed. Like if someone, like, I don't know, I feel like electronic lots are like, they're either hard to cover up or something, but the place is so rusted.
あの貧相な。失礼。しかし実際
That's my-
作りの休みずの住居もかね。
That's my thing.
脆い木板でも電子錠は仕込めます。そうすれば実際見事なカムフラージュになるでしょうね。
It's pretty hard. I mean, in my mind, it's pretty hard to fake electronic lots. Like, they usually look different.
じゃあ血で記されるという過去の印は
That's easy.
一体何だというのだね。
Misato, you gotta ask the hard questions, like the giant werewolf.
過去による託戦が血文字で伝えられるなどというのもありえないだろう。人間がやったら気づくはずだ。
Not if you're asleep.
麻酔ガスなら一発です。
I said drugs, but I guess the gas actually makes more sense. It's easier to target. Because I guess, yeah, my whole thing was how do the werewolves not suffer from the drugs?
あなたならご存知のはずだ。亜酸化窒素とオクトゲンチラインの混合ガスは理想的な全身麻酔を実現する。周期もほとんどない。これはある意味危険なので普通はあえて匂いをつけるそうですが、今回はそれもプラスに働く。
バカを言うな。確かに君は少しばかり医療知識があるようだが、麻酔は
It's true.
専門医がいるほど難しい技術だ。
I don't know much about it, but one of my cousins studied in anesthesia. Like he's a person who applies it to people. So I don't know how that shit works. Can you really just gas the whole room And it's like wooden houses. Wouldn't it like leak? Wouldn't you get affected if you like go in? Maybe not. I have no idea. Honestly, I don't have much knowledge on anesthesia.
いるんでしょう。野里家以外の専門医が。
いたとしても、その上で各住居にさらなる改造を無断で施し、必要な密閉空間を作ったとしても、生命維持設備もない場所で本人の同意なく混沌させるような乱暴な施術で確実な蘇生が実現できるとは。
This would actually explain why we didn't fall asleep in the outhouse, because they obviously don't have that set up for anesthesia. It could also, like, maybe the crazy old wolf guy knows this because he like lives in a dwelling, like in like a barely livable shack, which we didn't see, but we assume that can't really use anesthesia for that. So maybe he does know stuff like that.
そうです。確実に蘇生しなくてもいい。
運悪く死亡させても構わない。死体を損壊して家の外に
Yo, that's crazy.
物意味違反者と見分けはつかない。
So if they just fucked up, just say, oops, corruption did it. Okay, it's coming together. I think the biggest thing for me is the electronic locks, but say we all believe this. There's still some questions I want.
バカな。そんなバカみたいな。
わかりますよ。僕だってこんなオチを明かされ
Me
たら
too,
納得
honestly,
できない。
but it could be real.
でもそれが可能である以上、これは神業でも何で
But
もない。
again, we still have some hard questions. Hopefully, he knows how to
ト
ask
リッ
them.
クで実現できる不思議な事象は全てトリックによって発生してるんですよ、野里さん。
ああ、わかった。
It's possible.
実現可能だということ。君がそう信じていること。そして、君がさっき謝罪をした意味も。この部屋が放置されているということは、身車の連中は、ここに気づかなかったか。入れない。しかし、こうして大っぴらに探索をし、
That's how this loop
大
ends.
声で議論をしたからには、先方は気づくはずだ。
Damn, we're not gonna get the hard questions about the giant werewolf. I assume Haruaki, since he believes this theory, he knows that the dreaming, the loops, and the monsters, the giant monster is supernatural and not part of the feast. I just wanted to know what they think of the giant werewolf. If everything else is planned, then the giant werewolf must be something. Because there's the one thing while...
そしてそのことに気づいたとすれば
Sorry, no, Sata. We'll save you next time now.
我々は
But, you know, there's that one part where Yoshitsugu fought the giant werewolf and he lost, but he had like wolf hair in his hand. No, that could have just been a setup. Okay, I kind of believe it. It's hard to me imagine like some of the stuff, like taking away corpses through a secret tunnel and destroying it with machinery and coming back. I don't know why they couldn't just destroy it after the wolves go to sleep and just use normal tools to like, or just bring like a fucking hammer with like a couple people and start smashing. To me, that seems a bit more reasonable. And again, these are wooden houses, so in my mind, I didn't even think they had like metal locks or metal doorknobs or whatever they used, but I can believe that. But there still are questions.
宴の開始を待たず殺す必要がこれは
そう。
That's crazy. So this, I mean, there is still supernatural stuff happening, but most of the feast isn't supernatural at all. My consciousness began to fade. But they heard about the looping thing, right? What do they think of that? The irresistible drowsiness took over my body.
君の勝ちだな。
And I guess every time we like ventured into... No, but like... No, I was gonna say every time we ventured in the mist when we were leaving Yasumizu, that could have been anesthesia, but obviously not, because we were outside the village. They didn't even know us. They probably don't know about the looping at all. Like 90%. That's probably just because we're locked in here through the dream thing.
ほらね。
もっとうまい方法は。
すみません。
Unable to stand, I fell to my knees. I hit my forehead on the desk, but the pain was minimal. It didn't kill me, huh?
どうせあるだろう親父。これだ。
He could still move. Crawling on his hands and knees, he opened a drawer and took out a small glass bottle.
君が死ねば全ては。
We should, yeah, maybe you should kill Haruaki, because if they heard about the looping, they might not kill him. They might, like, kidnap him and try to get more information out of him.
ならばこれを。
Dude, look at Nosato,
ト
man.
リカブト。
He's even, like, who knows how they're gonna kill them. It could be brutal. He's even giving the bottle to Haruaki.
捕まって。
That's my thoughts exactly. Dude, Nosato is so based. Actually, my favorite male character in this series for now. Well, probably forever. I appreciated that. I reached out, took it, and put it to my mouth. Put it in my mouth.
私も
Okay, enough for him too? More the better.
たとえなかったことに。
It's better to go off on your own
何と
terms.
しても先祖の積み重ねてきた
And now they can destroy the evidence in this loop.
無駄にする。
I'm guessing it was because they just couldn't get inside. Just one last sentence.
無駄には
I got you, brother.
しない。
I will create the happy future.
絶対。
And if Ritako somehow lives and isn't evil or whatever the what's going on with her, you can have her, bro. You can have her. I think we made something good with Chiemi. I just had to say that much. I now had a duty to fulfill this for this awkward man. My bro. Awkward brother. With every loop I gained not only memories but one-sided responsibilities as well. That meant that I really had to save everyone, right? I like that, Haruaki. I like the sense of responsibility. Death came quick. Dude, what a chapter, man. I will say, like, I think for this game, I do enjoy, like, the werewolf game the most. Like, I still enjoy the lore gathering stuff, but, like, I probably, like, enjoyed it more in the first, like, 2/3 of the game. But this is still fun, and this was a really enjoyable chapter. Anyways, let's visit the sheep. Watch Hint Corner, of course.
やったな大将。最後の鍵の一つ。
Thank you, thank you.
ゲットだ。今回は怪盗編の中でも相当に
It was pretty long, but I liked it.
しかもどえらい中身だった。早速まとめようぜ。今回のバッドエンド11題して清之助と暗がりでイチャイチャした結果
Flirting with the
に
boys.
ついてだが手に入った情報は大きく2つ。長者側が調べ上げた富士吉村の長い歴史、そして
Eye of the
ミ
Migaruma.
グルマの目と呼ばれる監視網だ。監視網については夫妻子春明は結構前からうすうす気づいてた節があるな。
Yeah, I wasn't really pitching that too. My whole idea that the head families weren't involved in the super, quote-unquote, supernatural part of the feasts. But I guess they just adapted it to modern times to make it more controlled.
歴史については
Or at least they got a better look in
信頼
things.
明神の本質に大きく踏み込むものだったな。俺らがどう結実するのか。
Get hyped.
加速への期待を高めといてくれ。ちなみにここまで順路沿いに来た大将は最後の鍵のうち4つはもう手に入っているはず
We
だ。
have 3, right?
このうち3つを使えば2、ノームの9。
Maybe we can do that next time. We'll have to have a look next episode.
そこで便所かよとはまあ言わねえでくれ。 すげえ大事な分岐点だからよ。キーが揃ってねえ大将はエンド3を見て流れの確認をするのもいいと思うぜ。よし、今回はここまで。次も元気に死んで
Ain't
こ
sheep. I mean, we used to have a lot of mysteries, specifically with Mako and the old man, and Rikato, of course. Before we end this off, though, since I keep forgetting, maybe we should just take a quick peek at what the keys actually say. The ones we gathered. Though I kind of forgot which ones they are. Okay, here's the Chiemi one. Just like me, Chiemi also loops back in time whenever she dies, retaining her memories. Her heart has been wounded and twisted through the maddening cycles of death and rebirth, but she hasn't completely broken yet. She made me realize that the trigger for the loops isn't either of our deaths. In hindsight, there should be times I looped where my cause of death was vague. If I reconsider the conditions, I may catch a glimpse of the mastermind. I mean, we looked when we hung Mochi, when we were the snake, but I didn't really see anything different. This is the one we just got. As I thought, Kionosuke was a reasonable man. With his help, I was able to learn the head's perception of the Feast of the Yomi Purge, as well as the long historical background behind it. Through death, I learned the Migaruma are using cutting-edge surveillance network and are intervening with Yasumizu. This will be a huge clue to resolving the incident. This is from our Mamiya talk. Hisato taught me some useful psychology about mythology, or taught me some useful knowledge about mythology and psychology. The stories about the spider's divinities were particularly impressionable. The Amatsukami, the Kunisukami, and the Great Mother archetype dream catchers. Now then, what would be the spider Fujiyoshi? Rikato? Is that it? I think that's it. Oh my god, we only have one key left. I didn't even realize we were so close. And can we get that last? Oh wait, no, we have two keys, and one of them you get from the darkness one we just haven't done yet that they suggested at right after we got the 21. Did we read the 21? Thanks to the sacrifices of Kaizen and Haruchan, I won as a wolf, or so I should have, but then a series of incomprehensible events occurred, such as the resurrection of God and the demise of Japan due to the sudden appearance of a giant monster. Just then, a mysterious sheep appeared, revealed it, giving me my loop memories, and said it was trying to stop the dream. To prevent this horrible outcome, it returned me to the loop once again. Where are the keys I need to reach the truth? Alright, great episode, and we are getting to the end. It's kind of funny. All our series are kind of ending around the same time. Like, we're almost done Mob Love Alternative, I think. It seems close to the end, too. Same with Chrono Trigger. Rand's Quest, I feel like we're a long ways off there, but yeah, coming to an end of an era on the channel, so. But it's been a good ride all around. Thanks for watching this episode, and next time, who knows? Who knows what awaits us? But until then, later.